Hey there everybody, it's Mark Crilley. I'm back with another How to Draw video. Today we're going to be learning how to draw a chibi style Spider Man. It is of course a tribute to the late great Stan Lee, who passed away this week. Unquestionably one of the titans of the comic book world, and now really of Hollywood, it has to be said. But let's go ahead and get started. People like to know the size I'm working at, so I've put a square here in place that is 4 inches on all sides. That works out to just a little bit over 10 centimeters, and then just a line right across the middle. I'm going to begin with some basic guidelines for the head, and at the same time just add a little bit of a shape for the torso. Alright, so as you know, when you draw on the chibi style, the head is quite large in proportion to the body, and that's why you can see here from top to bottom the head is actually more than half of the way from the top of the square to the bottom. Basically you get that sort of egg shape in place and try to get a triangular-ish kind of shape here. This is going to be one of the shoulders coming down to the waist. And once you've got that in place, you can probably move on to drawing the legs, or really what we're going to see is mainly the thighs, doing this classic pose that you often see in Spider-Man illustrations. I'll go ahead and draw it and then come back and give you some tips. So you see the shape ends up looking almost like a pair of goggles in a way. It's really a single shape here for the upper part of the thigh heading off in these two different directions. Looks a little strange now, but I think by adding the feet down here you'll have a clearer idea of what I'm going for. Basically, in terms of the placement, you're making sure that they don't reach to the ends of these guidelines that you put in at the beginning. So long as they get close but don't quite touch it, you should be in good shape. Let's go ahead and draw the feet then, and maybe at the same time I'll go ahead and draw a guideline for one of the two arms, the one that's going to be reaching up and grabbing hold of the spider web string, you know, that he's swinging on. So there you see the shapes of the feet. Note that they kind of come to a point. That's something I've seen in a lot of superhero comics. I don't know if that means they're wearing pointy boots for kicking the bad guys, or if it's just a stylistic choice. But in any case, note the direction of these feet. This one pointing more or less straight down, a little off to the left. This one also down but to the right. And here a relatively simple shape here with the ball of the fist, which is going to be holding on to, as I said, the web that allows him to swing. Note that the hand touches that far guideline over there. Now we're going to go ahead and begin drawing the shape of this hand. This is going to be that classic kind of web shooting hand pose. I'm going to do it in 2 parts because it is a little bit complex. Let's get started with the basics. So here you've got the basic shape of the hand. I guess you'd call it the palm of the hand here, and we're going to be doing some serious foreshortening here. You can compare the size of this hand to this hand, this one reaching back, this one really shooting out towards the viewer in classic superhero pose fashion. And now it's time to draw really 3 different shapes, one for each of the fingers and one for the thumb. And after that, I suppose we'll be drawing the eyes, and we'll finally be done with all of the guidelines. Maybe let's just do all of them at the same time and bring the guideline part of this to a close. Alright, so looking kind of strange right now, barely even looks like a hand, but we're going to get the final line work in place in just a moment, and you'll see what I was going for. But for the time being, focus on the direction of each one of these. This is going to be the thumb, this is the pointer finger, this is the pinky. Notice that they're really going in rather drastically different directions there. And this one passes outside of the box, such as the size of the hand itself, larger really than the head, as it's kind of supposed to give us a 3D effect there. As for the eyes, I would say think about a kind of a crescent moon. You know, it's sort of flattened on the top but very curved on the bottom, and because the head is turned in a 3/4 point of view, this one gets a little compressed, a little smaller from side to side, and is a little closer to the contour over here. Alright, well, enough of all this time lapse. It is time to get into the real-time drawing. I'm going to zoom in on the head here, and we're going to take you through it line by line every step of the way. Alright, so let's get into it, and first I should point out that I did erase these guidelines here in the area of the head so that we can begin finalizing things. The first thing that we need to do is to begin adding these big black outlines, and I'm just going to draw the shape. We'll color them in later on, but I want you to sort of focus on This is like this bold outline of the eye that follows it pretty closely, but actually is not exactly the same, because as it comes up here, it begins to curl around almost like a claw, if that's a good way of putting it. You get just a little hook up here. And as I said, all of this is eventually going to be colored in black. But let's move on and do the same thing over here. And as I said, it's sort of following along, but as I studied the shape itself, I noticed that it's following quite closely down here, and then maybe pulling up and away the further away it gets. I hope I'm getting this right, and forgive me, Spider-Man experts. For all I know, there are different ways of doing this suit, depending on the era that you look at. Different artists bring their own kind of approach to it. But let's begin by drawing the spider webbing that goes across the top of the forehead here. And really what you're aiming toward is to have 4 different vertical lines. Of course, not truly vertical, but these are the, curving across the top of the forehead. And so in a way, I'm starting with just very rough guidelines here so as to try to get the spacing even. It can be a challenge to draw 4 lines that are equally spaced. You can see what I'm doing here. In a way, it's easier to draw 5, I find, because then you can draw that one that's right up the middle. But at least the drawings that I studied had the 4 separated. Maybe you're free to choose any number of lines that you want. I wanted to take a moment, though, to also give some credit to Steve Ditko. Of course, the name Stan Lee is very well known. The name Steve Ditko is not so well known, but he was the co-creator of Spider-Man, and very important to the creation of this character. And interesting that they both ended up passing away in the same year. Steve Ditko, the artist, passed away earlier this year in June. Kind of fitting, I guess you could say, in terms of Spider-Man, that the 2 main creators share the same year of death. But let's go ahead and start adding the webbing part, which I think is a little more fun. And you're curving the lines inward toward the nose, I guess. And again, I don't know if there's if Spider-Man artists count the number of rows of these lines, or if they just sort of do what feels right, But in the drawings that I studied, I saw 1, 2, 3 visible rows, maybe a 4th one just peeking over the top of the head. Why not? Just sort of sneak it in there. And I suppose for chibi style, you're always simplifying things anyway, so we're probably putting in fewer lines than you would in a realistic drawing of Spider-Man. And I'm going to go ahead and continue these over here. I believe it's supposed to just spread all the way out on all sides. I'm beginning to regret having chosen to do this real time. Is it that interesting to see Mark Curley draw all these lines? But I'm going to go ahead and do 1 up the middle here, maybe do 2 on the sides. And when you come down here, of course, you're going to want to reverse that pattern, curving inward towards the nose. Of course, it's sort of curving upward from this point of view. And there we go. I think we maybe I get 1 more in here to sort of complete that section. And as I said, this is going to get darkened in later on. But what I'm going to do is refocus, and we'll move over to refining the drawing of the hand, the sort of web-slinging hand over here to the left. All right, now this is going to be a little bit challenging, I must say. Drawing hands is hard no matter what, whether you're drawing a cartoony hand or a realistic hand. I find that it requires a lot of concentration. But I'm erasing these basic guidelines because they will not be part of the final. drawing, and let's begin by, I'm going to start by refining this lower section of the palm, actually, which I think sort of needs to divide into two parts. So you see me taking what was a straight line and dividing it into two. And then the real challenge, I think, is going to be drawing these two middle fingers, the middle and ring finger, I guess it would be. Does Spider-Man wear a ring under the costume? Please let me know in the comments. But you see me turning this into, sort of looks like a backwards number 3, dividing this into two equal sizes of knuckle. And then we're going to come across here, and you imagine two fingers that are bending in toward the palm, toward the base of the palm. And I don't know if is he activating a button or something that shoots the web? Or does it just look cool? Which is reason enough for drawing the fingers this way, I think. Come on, it looks cool. And then I'm going to erase that initial guideline there. And there you go. You end up with the two fingers that create that classic pose. And if you want to, you can have this one sort of extend a little bit past to show the structure there. And now comes, I think, the fun part, maybe it's the tricky part, you tell me, of drawing these sort of bands, these lines, the webbing lines that help to define the shape of the fingers. Now when people, when artists are drawing Spider-Man, they have this aspect of drawing all these curving lines. And in a way, it's a test of whether you are fully imagining the fingers in 3 dimensions, because these lines definitely help to reveal the structure of the hand. I think Spider-Man artists should be paid more, though, than other artists, just because of the costume. They have to draw these lines again and again. Right? Am I right? But you can see each time I'm altering the direction of the lines so that they reveal the structure of the hands, even in a chibi drawing, which is normally quite cartoony. My instinct is to let these lines reveal the anatomy, the structure beneath. And down here, for some reason I tend to start at the tip and then work my way back. And there you go. Now the last thing we want to do while we're zoomed in over here is to take this section of the shoulder and arm, which is greatly foreshortened, and refine these lines a little bit. I don't think we want this shoulder to be quite so angular as that. And I'm going to put one curving line here that is really supposed to symbolize the whole forearm that we can barely see. Sort of like Popeye style, giant forearm there. And depending on your knowledge of anatomy, you can start to work down towards refining the chest, which I guess I can just, I can go ahead and do this whole chest area. Why not? I think we've got enough of it in view with the camera. One thing I'm going to do here is draw just one line across the bicep, which is more about the costuming, because the costume does split between red and blue. And I'm going to also take this area and sort of split it into two sections, the upper area being for the chest. Now, a lot of superheroes are very bulky and super muscular. I believe the idea with Spider-Man, because he was a teenager, and maybe just because of the nature of the heroics, is that he's not so bulky. He's always seems a little more, I don't want to say thin, but I mean he's muscular, but he's just not bulky. There's a word for it that I can't think of right now. And now it's time to get detailed with drawing the spider emblem that goes right there in the middle of the chest. Not a whole lot of space in this chibi style drawing, but there's, of course, the spider has 8 legs, so you do 2 on both sides pointing upwards, and then 2 on both sides pointing downwards. For your arachnoid accuracy. Hopefully that works. I don't think I've got it quite the way it is on the costume. It's tricky stuff, especially when you get this small. But there you go, and I think all across here you're also going to see those same kind of lines. I think at this point it gets so tiny that I'm going to give myself freedom to not get too uptight about where everything goes in terms of these lines. You can do a better job than me, I'm sure, if you if you draw this slightly larger, for one thing. And okay, we definitely need to refocus if I'm going to draw this other arm. Give me a moment. So I've tilted the camera at a slightly odd angle just to try to get all of these remaining areas of the drawing into frame. And you definitely want to take this simplified shape of the arm and divide it into two, the sort of bicep area and the forearm area. And as I said, the costuming kind of splits into between blue and red. And interestingly, this sort of glove area connects with an area that goes up along the bicep. And as for drawing the hand, I'm going to begin by drawing a thumb up here. Kind of keep things cartoony here. I'm going to do the thumb and the base of the palm first, getting that into place. And then sort of elongate this area over here and maybe a little bit over here to suggest the fingers that are curving around the webbing thread, or what do you call it? The vine, like he's swinging on a vine. And there you go for the hand, and of course you're going to have the web. Boy, this is getting very nearly out of frame. Sorry about that, folks. Hope that makes that visible. We are going to be drawing the web. I'm going to save that for later on, but it's going to suffice to say it's going to come out like that right there, and maybe come out on the other side as I finish drawing that bit. And because we've got everything still in focus, I think I can move on down here to drawing the legs. These are quite exaggerated the way the thighs have been drawn, and as I said, it's supposed to, the shape is supposed to prepare you for getting just a little bit of the upper part of the calf down here. So you see me sort of dividing that into two separate sections. This all going to be just blue, thankfully, so we don't have to draw all those lines of the webbing on the costume. But over here we're going to kind of do the same thing. I'm going to split this whole area into two parts, have this line come up like that and come to a stop, basically. And as this kneecap, which is a little more angular, comes down, we get a second curving area here for the calf, the upper part of the leg. And that, my friends, is basically it, except that the feet also have kind of like the red Spider-Man boots on them. So you do want to get some lines in here, like so, and get that webbing going on. I got enough space for maybe 3 rows of the webbing, I think. And then, and only then, can we say that our job is finished. I'm going to just sort of cheat back here. Huh? And there you go, my friends. That's all the basic line work. I'm going to refocus the camera so that we can draw the web thread that he's swinging on, and then we're going to really move on to the inking and the coloring. All right, well, the fun part about the webbing is that you can really just draw it any way you feel. My feeling is that she's swinging in such a way that it shoots off to the left here. And then with this remaining part of the webbing, you can do whatever you feel like. I think it would be interesting if it sort of loops around on itself, maybe, like so. And I've noticed, and I don't know if they did this in the old days, but certainly in more recent illustrations of Spider-Man, I think they try to get a little bit of detail into the webbing, little sort of cross lines that make it a little more visually interesting. And so I'm adding a little extra lines here and there. And that basically takes care of that. Now I wish I could do real time on all the inking and the coloring, but sadly this video has already gone on awfully long. I'm going to go ahead and do all the rest of it, the inking and the coloring, in time lapse. But before I do that, I'm just going to point out that I'm using markers here, and I've got basically, you know, fire engine red basically, and then I got two different shades of blue. I'm going to do a light and then a light base layer of blue, and then a darker color for adding shadows. Might get some darker for the red as well. Let's see how that goes, but let's go ahead and get into it. Alright, well there's the finished illustration. I did want to say that I found a darker shade of red was necessary, but not finding one, you can use brown to supply those shadows. Just a little tip there for you. Not everyone can find a darker red marker in their set. One other thing, for those of you really paying attention to the details, there are these little hooks down here around the bridge of the nose, I guess, that sort of echo the hooks that I talked about up here. And suffice to say, those of you who are experts on Spider-Man, you know this costume way better than I do. But I did want to say thank you